Definitely cursive.
My red lines. Cool. We're now working with the gas.
Hopefully not, but yes.
Hopefully not.
I'll get to their structure. How's that going for you so far, you think?
I mean, last night, I was like,
Are they like black photos or brown? That's brave. That is brave.
I'm gonna try.
I like the approach. I applaud you as people. Not nasty with that. How's he doing? If you talk to me, now I touched it and I go to school.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you so much, Dong, for being here tonight. And thank you to all the students, staff, and faculty who helped out with this event. As you know, lecture days are busy days for students as they have a hand in setting up every aspect of our events, from signposting to AV to post-lecture dinners. And as you know, the whole school participates in these events and the meals that follow. Big shout out to Elaine and Scott for helping with the dinner tonight. And I want to thank our faculty member, Daniel Ayat, who first contacted Dong about a visit. We're lucky to not just have Dong-Ping Wong, but his entire firm at Arcosanti, Food New York, for the next couple of days. This includes Bella, Ryan, Rachel, Boonmi, Daniel, and others that I still have yet to meet. This lecture is accompanied by a variation on a plein air painting workshop, which will happen tomorrow at 10 a.m. So everyone is invited to participate in that. And if you can't make it, they will also be hosting a mahjong tournament after dinner in the music center. So please join us for either of those events. I'll turn it over to Daniel Ayat to introduce Dong's work and background. Thank you.
Hi. I first met Dong when I was invited to speak at his firm at the height of the pandemic about the history of the clinic. And it is not, I think, a lot of firms who use research at that level and who are that committed to kind of making considered work, especially when it was a little emergency outside. So it was a very interesting introduction to a firm that uses research really well and that uses speculative projects really well, which I think we will hear about very shortly. Dong, as you know, is the founder and director of Food New York. He has ongoing projects, including a garden spa in the Cayman Islands. I believe you were just there, right? So Dong's been suffering for us. He's working on the new headquarters for Hypebeast, and he designed the Plus Pool, which is the world's first floating and filtering pool. Before Food New York, Dong was the founder of Family New York and has led designs in Finland and in Slovenia for museums, for standalone stores, for Off-White, working with the late Virgil Abloh, and on stage design for the early Kanye West. Residential projects also include projects in Paris and in Los Angeles, and he comes from a background at Columbia and at Berkeley. So without further ado, I give you Dong-Ping Wong.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having the whole studio. Thank you, the whole studio, for coming down. It's an honor to be here. I was here as a tourist maybe 8 years ago and was completely baffled and lost and amazed, so it's wild to actually be here presenting our work. As a quick intro, like as Daniel said, the office started in 2018. I realized in this photo, I think there's only 2 of us from this group left. We've effectively replaced everybody with better people, obviously. But you can see Bella there in the middle, who's joined us tonight. But the kind of collection of work, especially in the early days, as a lot of young offices starting out, was a lot of competitions in random places around the world. So Pedestrian Bridge in Slovenia, we proposed a kind of a pedestrian tower / marker in Chinatown near our office, a very structurally unsound tower for collecting wind. We did a pop-up for Nike and Travis Scott, a bunch of stuff, the stage for Kanye, as Daniel mentioned, an apartment on Mercer Street, which is now basically completed. We've been waiting for the final set of furniture for a little while, but hopefully we'll get to show some of the final photos soon. This is a house in Jamaica, a house for Kim and Kanye, a boardwalk in Atlantic Beach. And so I just wanted to go through a really quick collection of a big variety of the work we do. This is one of the Cayman projects that we're working on, in this case, a large hotel and residential complex. But for the lecture today, the title is Get Out, and it's kind of in 2 halves, and I thought that the both halves actually applied well, I think, to speaking here at Arco Santi. The first half is really just about getting outside. It's pretty straightforward. And in a lot of ways trying to figure out how architecture can get you more outside, really get you outside of the architecture. And so one of the very first projects that we ever had built was for a store in Hong Kong with Virgil. And if anybody's been to Hong Kong, it's a very tropical and jungly city, but also a very concrete heavy city. And so the store took directly from that half of it would be jungle, half of it would be the sort of concrete. And the front of the store, which is, we're standing on the street in this photo, completely open to the air. The seal for the store isn't until back here. And the idea was that it reflected, there's a really large public park across the street. We just wanted to reserve about 1/3 of the store where you didn't have to shop if you didn't want to. And again, this is a huge credit to Virgil that for his very first store, he was happy cutting away a huge chunk of the square footage just to have this funny jungle in there. In the back, I was gonna say it's a very traditional store, but it's not really, but it traditionally displays product anyway. But again, I think the biggest win for us was that we were able to argue not having any kind of weather seal in the front. So if it's humid in Hong Kong, which often it is, it's humid in this front part of the store. If it rains, it gets wet. And it was nice to see people that weren't even interested in shopping just taking a breather as they were there. We continue to do a bunch of work with Virgil, a store in Japan, in Singapore, in Shanghai, and this was the shop in New York, which was really just there to imitate a gallery since it was in Soho. And the installation was, in this case, was dying plants, but we brought in a little bit of nature anyway, just at the tail end. The project that Daniel mentioned, actually, again, where we met the first time, was in that period where I think just even worrying about the air you breathe was top of mind. And these are the number of hospitals in and around New York. And you know, at the time, it was certainly an observation. We had this observation that the hospitals were just these large insular blocks, and they weren't really part of the community. And so what we wanted to do was there a way to just bring in more air? Again, open up that hospital in some way. We have zero, just to be totally clear, we had zero and have zero experience designing for any kind of healthcare facility. It was just for us, was there a way to actually make the hospital more civic? in a way that you could actually enjoy being outside again, but also feel like you could go to places that was giving you healthcare in some form or fashion, and integrating basically that idea of health back into the city. And so this is something that we took on as an office just as a really loose set of studies. These are just some of the sketches that came out of it, some amazing collages, which I don't remember if I included, we'll see in a second, and just some models that we were playing around with. But we got a chance to learn from Daniel and others just about the history of clinics and health and architecture, and it was something that eventually we wanted to propose again back into Chinatown, which our office is in. This is Cayman Islands, a project that is ongoing. It should be done in about a month. Obviously, you go to Cayman Islands for this, and the hotel, who was the client, asked us to design a bathhouse on a site a block away from the beach. And so the initial challenge was, why would anybody even want to leave the beach? And what we wanted to do was, not as a surprise, I suppose, but my first understanding of Cayman was it's very hot. When you get down there, you're sweating a lot. And and to do a bathhouse for us was, could you just stay outside? Every sort of spa and bathhouse that I'm familiar with anyway, you're, again, enclosed. Oftentimes you're in a basement. It's this hermetic sort of space, and we wanted to basically treat it like a garden. And so the concept was a big hedge. You carve out the hedge. You can wander around this garden and discover all these different environments. This was a more developed version of that. I'll go through in a little bit of detail, but again, it's just a mixture of all these programs. You enter through here, lockers, a big athletic and gym area, a central courtyard pool, and then a mixture of different spa programs, hammams, cold plunges, all those things. As it's developed, again, the basic idea was that you're surrounded by nature. And so instead of going to the beach, you're surrounded by a different kind of nature that Cayman has to offer, which obviously is not typically highlighted at a place like Cayman Islands. And you're discovering all these different hidden pools and ways to sweat, but hopefully in a more enjoyable way than typical. The central courtyard, and I was going to jump to this. So construction started, I think technically 2 years ago. Sometimes it's paused. Cayman is an island where they will run out of concrete across the entire island, run out of wood, and you'll have to wait 6 weeks for shipments to arrive back at the island. But now it's moving along pretty well. This was one of the early photos of this same pool here as the foundation was dug. And this was that pool 3 days ago, almost there, ignoring the piece of styrofoam floating in the middle of the pool and all the mud. But it's gone through at least already a transformation where it's weirdly more wild than we expected, which is pretty fun. The plants are starting to fill in. What I love about it is that it's a project that will continue to grow and change. You'll have to take care of it. You'll have to prune it, basically, or not, or just let it overgrow. But it's exciting to see it take shape, even in much more traditional architectural ways. This is that central pool, which is slowly being built out now. And then the other half, let's say the second thematic of Get Out, was part of the office. We do a lot of initiative work. And a big reason for that is just to find a way to work a little bit differently, I suppose, than what is traditional architecture practice, or work outside of the kind of typical systems of architecture. This is a bit of an unfair potshot, but this is the board of NCARB. For anybody that's not familiar with NCARB, they are the national board that defines legally what is and is not an architect. I finally got licensed 2 years ago. You have to go through the board, take all the tests. I love this set of people. Basically, for us anyway, it didn't feel like we really belonged in architecture when architecture was defined, certainly in legal terms. But even when you get into, we're much more familiar, let's say, in the kind of deanship, again, certainly a much more diverse group in a lot of ways, but still didn't quite feel like us, I suppose. And in both cases, whether it's very professional or very academic, neither of those worlds were that satisfactory to me, and I like to think anyway, the whole office. And so we started doing all these different things. We started a very rough and ready BIPOC Studios design list, basically studios owned and operated by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And then we just started doing initiative work. So this was actually one of the very first projects that I initiated, or that the office initiated, Plus Pool, which Daniel mentioned. the idea was, how could we do the kind of work we wanted to do before anybody asked us to do it? The initial observation was that Manhattan is an island. It certainly doesn't feel like an island, certainly not like Cayman does. So could we find a way to actually get into the river? Something that most people there, and for good reason, take the subway under, take the bridges over, but you never consider it as a natural body of water. And so the design is very simple. It's a plus-shaped pool. The idea is it's these 4 pools kind of that click together: athletics, lounging, laps, and kids pool. And so the idea was obviously that there's lots of different types of swimmers, different types of people that would want to use a pool like this. But the big thing is that it filters water. And so for a number of years, we were doing a lot of testing and developing a filtration system that actually filters 1 million gallons a day. This is actually a bit out of date. And through that, the whole idea was that for people to appreciate the water again like a natural body of water, and eventually for the city to caretake the East River, which is obviously a very polluted river, you have to touch it. You have to simply love it. Kind of ethical and moral moves were not going to get the job done. And so we wanted people to swim. But first was testing. We learned all about all sorts of parameters. We were working with Arup and Columbia University to learn all this. I was in this testing container for about 8 weeks one summer, pretending I was a scientist, basically, and prototyping all these different filtration methods. This is a scientist named Greg, who we stuck out on this little barge for 3 months on the Hudson side, again, testing these filtration ideas, collecting more data than I believe has ever been collected on any river in New York. And the reason for that is we were testing, analyzing data for every 15 minutes, obviously because we wanted to make sure that as anybody jumped in, the water was clean at any point. Typically when someone's testing water, it's at best once a week because you're testing the overall health of the river, which wasn't quite what we wanted to test. But eventually we developed a filtration system. I have a patent under my name now, which is wild. But it's something that's never been done before. But equally, at least for me, as exciting was we started it with good friends of ours at the studio named PlayLab, Archie and Jeff, who helped us just launch it into the world. They helped us build a website, a newsletter, and a newspaper. At the time it launched, which was now almost a decade ago, or more than a decade ago, it was a very hot summer. It picked up all this press. Letterman, before he retired, made fun of it, which was a good peak of my career. And we started Kickstarter, and this was at a time when crowdfunding was still very novel. And so we raised around $300,000 just to do the testing and eventually build up a nonprofit around it. One of the things that nonprofit does, very simply, is sells a tile. The idea is that you can own a piece of public infrastructure in New York once this thing is built. And then we do all the typical nonprofit stuff. We throw parties, we do a lot of programming. But as an architect anyway, I think what I find super interesting about it is if this is roughly a way a project gets done, a policy allows a client to propose a certain type of project, the client comes with funding and a site, finds a team, the design happens, and the design gets built. We kind of accidentally did that backwards. We had a design idea, we didn't know who to work with. We actually, on the back of the newsletter that you saw earlier, there was a list that said we need help from, and we listed out all these professions that we didn't know whether they existed or not, like filtration engineer, which doesn't really exist, water scientist, which is a pretty vague term, but we had no idea how to ask for help. And what was nice is as we developed the project, the site came to us. The city had a lot of interest from it, and now the site is in Two Bridges, which is a neighborhood in Chinatown. It is absolutely coincidence. It is the closest site to my house and the closest site to the office. But it's also like a lovely site, a site that is lacking in public space, lacking in any kind of waterfront access in a large way. The funding is primarily crowd-driven and now philanthropic. The client is basically just the city. And the policy side is probably the trickiest thing that we deal with, but also in a lot of ways the most impactful, because we're literally working with the Department of Health on rewriting what is legally considered a pool. Right now, a pool needs chemical chlorination, which obviously we don't want to do because that water ends up going back into the river. So that's quite exciting, but also a very, very tedious process. And then every once in a while, we get something beautiful built out of it. So this, I believe, was in 2019. We built a quarter-size version of the pool. This thing is not something to swim in. It's just a set of lights that changes to blue when the river itself is actually already pretty clean, which surprisingly is about 40% of the time, and then changes into a pink when the river is dirty. This was just out in the river for about a summer. On personal side, so this project, like I said, is well over 10 years old. Frankly, it'll be another 3 or 4 years until it's built. So I started doing some personal projects, just trying to make much faster objects. This was a chair that I was invited to design, part of an exhibition, and I just made an Instant Pot in the office with the help actually from a few people in the office, and just sculpted a bunch of fish around it. It works. We haven't gotten back from the gallery yet, but I was happy that it works. And then as the office itself, let's say a big part of Plus Pool and a lot of the work we do is just trying to get ways for people to come together and hang out in the spaces that we design. But also those spaces oftentimes are very slow, they're very expensive, and we frankly don't have a ton of say in terms of how they're operated. So one of the things we've been doing over the last few years is just to try to take over small bits of space ourselves in our neighborhood. This is in Chinatown in New York. Our office, I believe, is these windows here in this building. And so one of the projects we did was called Food Radio, where we took over an abandoned storefront in Chinatown. Ryan built this squiggly table that we installed in the middle of it. And it had 2 ideas. One was an open studio. Anybody from the neighborhood, anybody could come by and just have a workspace to work out of. We moved a lot of our library down there. And then the other side was we started a live radio station. And the radio station was interviewing friends of ours basically about how they make money in a creative field. Majority of the interviewees were people of color. And it was really just the initial intended audience were kids in Chinatown, which is a pretty low-income neighborhood, and the idea was you can actually have a career in creative fields. It's not a dream, it's actually you can do it practically. And so the only set question we asked everyone is, how did you make your first dollar, and how do you actually make money now doing what you do? Angela is a chef, for example, but we had a whole host of people, obviously some architects, designers, fashion designers, musicians. This is still live, it's not live obviously, but this is still up. You can listen to it at radio.food-newyork.com. It's something I would say with confidence that it's something we'd love to do again. We just haven't got around to it. But it was really nice having these very direct conversations about the financial side of the creative business. And something that we started doing a couple years ago, which we'll do a version of it hopefully tonight, is Mahjong Club, Food Mahjong Club. Bella is really spearheading this, and the idea is simply that we run a Mahjong party every once in a while and have Mahjong in the office. We played in the office almost every day. We've only done 3 right now where we invite lots of other friends to come in, and that's pretty much it. It's just a way for people to play Mahjong, sort of side door their way into hanging out in Chinatown more and appreciating Chinatown more. And through that, we started working with a couple nonprofits. This is one, and the largest event we've done, I want to say it was 2 months ago, but it was probably longer than that. But for a nonprofit called Welcome to Chinatown, who raise money for small businesses in the area. But it's very simple. It's just a fun night. But it is our chance to do a little bit of design that's very quick, but also really just understand what it's like to actually see how people use our space in real time, and almost work on the more community side. So there's Ryan again. Ashley's there in the back. So I wanted to end here partially because hopefully we get a chance to play some Mahjong tonight, but also that this aspect of our office, which hasn't, or let's just say that this part of the office is just as much design, I would say, as the kind of more traditional architectural side. It's fulfilling in ways that the traditional architecture side just isn't, or is certainly much slower to do. And it's great, and I think we're really lucky, or I feel very lucky anyway, that we get to do this and carve out a lot of this in the office as we do it. But I'll stop there. I'm happy to go back. I would love to go back if anybody has any questions. But I'd love to just start a discussion if anybody's curious about anything that we do, or wants to play Mahjong right away and just stop talking. That's cool too. But thank you again. It was great. Thanks.
I'm curious about some of your inspirations that sort of carried you to this place. I see a lot of parallels between Gordon Matta-Clark and Jim Wines of Sight and some of those artists and architects from the past. Like what are you influenced by? Like what are you calling from? And then how do you incorporate that into your work?
I will say, especially the site work, I don't know if it's influential because I think I came across it fairly late, but something that I love about it is it's really funny. And architecture could be funnier, I would say. So thank you. That's an honor, at least, to even have that mentioned, I think, in the same discussion. But I don't know what our influences are. I couldn't really pinpoint them, except that I would say it's not architecture or other architects. That's something that was both conscious and eventually became very easy just to ignore and get out of the architecture bubble. Again, I think we've been lucky to work with in a lot of fashion, which I think unbeknownst to us, or certainly unbeknownst to me until we were a few years into it, was really influential, partially because of its speed, which is also very exhausting. But getting to work with someone like Virgil, where the identity of him as a person is so upfront in the clothing and the community that he was able to build through all of his work. Just seeing how quickly design can translate into support from a community and excitement from a community of people that oftentimes aren't involved in those discussions or in certain rooms, let's say. I think that's been really huge, at least for me. I'll speak for myself anyway. I don't know. I'm hoping that, also I'm staring at Ryan just because you're right in front of me, but feel free to also, anybody else in the office, feel free to speak up. Fashion's an obvious one for me, mainly because I was never that interested in it generally until we started working with some amazing designers whose community side was much larger than even the stuff they were designing. Food, I guess. One of the reasons I named the office food is just because I love food. And one of the reasons I love it, one of the reasons the name, besides it also being a funny name, was what food does in terms of it brings people together. It can be very inexpensive and also very expensive. It's really local and universal at the same time. But at the end of the day, unless it tastes good, like it has to taste good. I feel like that's really key. It has to be delicious. And so I think design, architecture was so important that it has to feel nice in the dumbest way. It has to be a beautiful space no matter how smart it can be or how kind of like innovative it might be. If it's not a good place you want to be in, it doesn't work for us or for the people we work with. Plus an excuse just to like eat a lot, which is good too.
I'm curious with the mahjong parties and the other parties that you guys have been throwing. You said that you use them to kind of test things out and to see how people use your space. And I'm curious what the nitty-gritty looks like behind that, what you're testing, what the research looks like.
Yeah. So food radio, for example, we opened this space with the hopes that kids in Chinatown would just come in and hang out. That did not happen. I think that happened once, and that the only reason that happened is because Bella reached out to the public library across the street, and they have programming for local kids, and we said, do you want to do some of the programming here? And it's really obvious looking at it now, but a lot of that legwork of building up community was just obviously working with people that are much better at it and doing it for a long time in the neighborhoods that we're working in, and just giving them a space to do what they do already. As you can imagine, the people that came by, the people that are most interested were other design people. There were people already kind of in our network, friends of friends, people that heard about it, but through Instagram, for example. So that was something I think that was, again, a no-brainer looking back at it, but I think that, we're always saying we're designing for community, this community and that community, whatever. But it's until we end up doing stuff like this, that distance between the design itself and the people and how we hope they use it. There's no way to predict how they use it. That legwork is very different and really challenging for us. And I wouldn't say it's frustrating by any means, but it is like, oh, right, we can't just simply say like, come on in, here's a beautiful space or a fun space or an interesting space and expect people to come and use it. You have to really make it inviting, and you have to be very upfront and forward and be part of the neighborhood, basically. So we've been doing that more with mahjong. I wouldn't say mahjong is there either yet at that level. The parties are super fun. We're really happy with them. But again, we're not, there's already these communities of people playing mahjong, obviously in Chinatown. they're very separate from the parties we do. Not intentionally by any means, but we just don't know them yet. So I think that kind of community building is something that as designers we very rarely get a chance to do. And again, sometimes it's as easy as walking across the street. We had one night where a woman who lived in the neighborhood came by, and I think we were doing a pickling workshop. And so she saw that there was a bunch of food on the table and was like, just kind of poked her head in, and we were able to bring her into the pickling workshop. And the next day she brought us a bunch of food. And that was one of those things where like, I don't have no idea how we intentionally do that again. It just happened that when she walked by, we had an activity going on that was intriguing to her. But it was so rare, like it didn't really happen as much as we, in an ideal way, would want to happen. But I think we just wanted to try it out and keep trying it. In a way, how we design in the office is very fast, at least initially. The idea is to put all the bad ideas on the table. You have to get through all the kind of ugly work until you can get to the beautiful work. And in small touches, we're trying to do that by running these spaces, get through all the work that doesn't really work, basically, and hopefully arrive at something that does.
Can I add a little bit to that? I think that what we learned from food radio, we had 3 weeks of food radio, and it was the final week where we actually started to have a little bit of, recognition or kind of consistency in people that were coming in. And we learned actually, after we closed, that when people were asking where's food radio, it's really that, like, consistency is key in community building, and that's a really, really tricky thing in our work to establish, because we're brought on usually, like Dom pointed out, in most projects, like when lots of other things have already been figured out. Like a client is like, okay, we're ready with design, go, 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 go. You have, 8 weeks to figure it out and like work on an identity, and that's not enough time to establish, traction with the community. So I think that, we're just kind of with Mahjong Club now, we're taking our time, we're making sure that every few months there's going to be one of these parties. It's, very uncomplicated, and that's kind of, I guess, what we're building off of this food radio is like really building consistency.
Yeah, actually, the Mahjong Club also there. So we've done 3 so far. The first 2 in our office, and both of those are free. Basically, we invited a bunch of friends and people in the neighborhood to come over. The second one, we invited members of Welcome to Chinatown, the nonprofit I mentioned, to just come and play and have fun. And they enjoyed it so much where they were the ones who invited us to throw the third one part of their gala weekend. And that was, for me, a really good validating point that a nonprofit that we really respected doing work in the neighborhood wanted us to be a part of what they were doing. At the same time, that one we charged money because we were trying to raise money for this nonprofit. And it worked, but it also didn't quite feel right. It was like, okay, I think we stepped a little too far into now this party being a kind of fundraising event. Because once you get there, you're like, well, are we going to accept Budweiser as a sponsor for the next one? How are we going to make money? Is this going to be a profit thing? Like it started moving in this direction that we're like, I don't think this is prioritizing what we wanted it to do, which is just an evening for people in the neighborhood to come and play some mahjong. And so I think for the fourth one, the idea is like, let's do it small again. Let's do it free again. It won't probably get the audience that we had. It won't be as sort of like glamorous as it was, but that's okay. We'll reset a little bit and keep building, and maybe we only do one a year. That is a sort of, let's say, an organized, institutionalized kind of version of it. But again, that was sort of like, we didn't really know what it was going to be like, and we just wanted to try it and do it. And then you adjust again for the next one. So it's very iterative, especially with these events. I'd say the whole thing feels like a design project, and these are just kind of studies as you move along. We're just testing it on real people in real time, out of our own pocket.
Has this always been part of the studio? Like, not Mahjong specifically, but these kind of community-based activities, including the podcast?
Not in terms of having real events like this. I think Food Radio was 2018. And I think that was the first time we actually opened a space of any kind, whether it's our office or not. But the idea of initiatives have always been part of the practice, starting with Plus Pool. And it's because I think we had a lot of success with Plus Pool, purely from an office point of view. Like there was suddenly attention on us, and we were conversing with both press and the government and scientists, and that was very exciting. And it was again very validating that if we put out the work that we want. Well, I think what was really exciting about it was, typically with a client-based project, you don't unveil it to the public until it's done, and then the public can like it or not, but it's there. There's no say really. What's been really interesting with Plus Pool is, and Kickstarter was one version of this, you can like it or not, and if you don't like it, it won't happen. And there was that kind of public support has been huge with Plus Pool and continues to drive it. But it was the first projects we put out there just to see if it was something that the public wanted. But I think that was because we sort of just initiated ourselves and we didn't know really how to do it. Similar in the way to the modular, I think we don't really know what the path is. We've never done it before. We have no idea how to build something like this big at the time. And so we just needed to put it out there and get a reaction and then adjust again. Again, very similar to a desk crit, let's say. You put it out there, get a reaction, you adjust again. But the initiatives have always been a part of the office, and like a lot of small offices, it started off with competitions. We quickly realized we're using competitions mostly because there was a brief for us to work on as opposed to trying to win it. And then we decided just to invent our own briefs, basically. So we rarely do competitions anymore. If we have time, we tend to do an initiative instead, which are difficult, but they're really fun.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't really go anywhere. Like, they'll just be something internal and then it'll disappear again. The public may never really see any of it.
Yeah, I really admire how like these initiatives are embodying like an ethic of working together and value system. And I'm thinking about like how that might inform like client communication and like how does it affect in turn like the client-based projects and how you educate clients and communicate with them. For
Good
example.
question. Sorry, go
Or
ahead.
maybe not.
I assume it does
Yeah.
in some way.
I mean, there's fun that happens between both things.
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every client we work with, even if it's purely for commercial interests, wants a lot of people to come to their space. Sometimes it's because of community, sometimes it's because it makes more money. And even in the most dry sense, I think doing these projects gives us kind of leverage to like, look, we've made spaces where people want to come on our own, let alone with our past client projects. Like radio has actually been really interesting because we not only sort of made this very simple space, but we literally have a roster of people that in their own right now are actually very successful people. A lot of the clients, in a way, also, as dumb as it is, also want to be part of that network of people that we were able to speak to in free radio.
Right.
I don't know. I'd hope it does, but I don't know how it's affected how we talk about our work. It's certainly become part of the library of work that we talk about, but I'd be very curious if we speak about our work differently because we're doing these kind of projects.
Right.
I'm probably too in the middle of it to know. I don't know if Ryan. I don't know if like these guys think our approach has changed and our communication has changed.
I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of our project concept work is centered around bringing people together, like whether that's a secondary concept to like some sort of like material or approach. Central to our thinking is usually like how do we get people here for like good reasons.
I will say what's also been really validating, I suppose, is that we get approached for a pretty diverse type of work. Like oftentimes, like I don't know how they found us, but that's cool. That like we've never done a project like that before. I don't know why they want to talk to us, and sometimes oftentimes it doesn't happen anything. But I would only imagine that the reason they're interested is because there's a thread through the other work that is not just they have a store and they want to do a store and they've seen a store and they want to do the same thing. And I think a lot of that is the community side.
Yeah.
It also makes it easier, I think, in a lot of ways for us intuitively be like, that's actually not the project for us. Yeah, so that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
How do you, now that you're kind of creating your own briefs as a new group, as a new firm, or as this version of your firm, how do you collectively, what's that process like in determining what you want to focus on? Are there like multiple channels where you just kind of like throw it on the wall and see if there's themes? What's that workflow? So what's that strategy?
What is that workflow? The cynical version of me wants to say like, I want to do something, but it's actually not true because I mean, the food radio is only food radio because of I think it was Bella's idea to bring the radio side into it and really make that the central piece. Mahjong I think is something that we were doing in the office, but again, actually Bella was very central into that becoming a sort of more organized piece. One of the things we do in the office, we kind of paused it, but I would love to bring it back, is that we reserved Fridays, we're calling it Independent Fridays. Right now it's Fridays just generally off unless we're very busy. But the idea was that you could use that time to basically do your own initiatives. You'd still get paid. It could be, as long as it was vaguely architectural related. And there was no like review process from the office. Like if you wanted to talk to the office, we could, and the idea was like one of the dreams, at least from the office side, was like that could turn into an initiative that the whole office could then take on and push. We did it for a little bit and then we dropped it, I think because we just wanted to take off our Fridays. But it's something that I really want to bring back. So that would be a little more organized in terms of generating ideas for the initiative.
Even that space for an architect to carve out time off is also a valid part of the creative process too. So it's nice to look at that.
It's also like a bit of a test on that belief that I think we can get what we need to get done in the 4 days. We can get what we need to get done in normal work hours. I've certainly, and I imagine a lot of people come from that environment where you're expected to work till 1 or 2 a.m. I mean, Daniel and I were laughing because Daniel came from OMA and we had some experience. We both had experience at OMA or versions of OMA. And it's like when you're at an office that works until 2 a.m., you don't start work till 5 p.m. You just sit in the office until 5 p.m. and like fuck around because you're just expected to be there the whole time. And so the 4-day-a-week thing and trying to keep very regular hours was not only just to make sure everybody had their normal lives, but a sort of argument that, yeah, you can actually get good work done in a much more reasonable amount of time. I will say it's very hard now, I think, to unless there's a deadline, to think about going back to full 5 days again, because I think we're kind of used to it. But the initiative side, it's also actually very, frankly, at least for me, it's very difficult to just initiate, to have an idea and know what to choose to run with. I think everybody has lots of ideas, but it's like, in a studio project where you don't have a site or you don't have a brief and you can invent whatever you want, oftentimes I just sit there and don't know what to do. That's kind of what the initiatives are like, and that challenge, I think, is something that we also want to try to work on. Just have more agency as an architect, and so you can actually do that, and some of that actually might actually even happen in real life. So I don't know what our process. That's a very long answer to say. I don't know what our process is for the initiatives.
How do you incorporate feedback into your daily process?
Into our daily process?
Yeah.
From a design point of view, we actually just, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but we just switched our weekly schedule to only having kind of formal design meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's kind of imitating a studio schedule of sorts. And part of that was to keep it a little more organized, but also just to give everybody the time, a little more time to work on the work instead of checking in every few hours. Those are fairly straightforward pinups, like really physical, like actual literal pinups, at least on Tuesdays. Right now we come into the office on Mondays. Every other day is up to everybody to decide if they want to come into the office or not. On early stages of our projects, because we do a lot of models, it's helpful to be in the office. But that design feedback is actually not that dissimilar from a school aspect in terms of just like pin up the work, we'll talk about it. But that's also where the emphasis on designing really quickly comes in, and not being precious with the idea, and letting it and trying to encourage it to evolve really quickly. Knowing also that the time it takes to get a good concept to an actual buildable and nice thing is much longer than the time it takes to arrive at that initial idea, and trying to make sure we have time to spend on that aspect of it. Was that your question? Okay.
You can wave this off, it's kind of selfish. I run a pirate FM radio station at Arcosani 106.9 FM, and I'm curious, like, why did you decide to build a radio program? Like, what was engaging about it, I guess, or out of all the things you do, why radio?
Did we do any radio interview before?
No. Friends of ours called Mantaa Press. They're an art book publisher based actually in Berlin. Started a radio station in New York out of a gallery, and we joined them on the radio with that. It was sort of a great community forward broadcasting space that kind of we were really excited by, and that was the kickoff. That was like, okay, it's an intimate space. You're talking with each other. You're talking into a microphone, but you have this large audience.
Sure.
You get to learn about a new form of broadcasting, spreading ideas, the word, and it's also non-visual. So it really kind of coaxes totally different ideas out than if you're asking somebody to, make something, draw something, build something. So
I'll say actually also from a very selfish reason was it was an excuse to call people that I wanted to talk to.
Sure.
Some people that I was like, I know their work, I'm a huge fan, I have no reason to contact them, but now I do. And people like talking about themselves. So that was actually a really nice excuse just for me to reach out. Because, like the central theme was also like, how do you make money as a creative person? How do you survive? How do you run a business and not lose your way? Or if you just want to get rich, for example, what's that conversation like? And not pretend like money wasn't central to surviving as a creative person. And I think it's something that, architects, as far as I know, are not taught how to run a business in school. It's taken me like 15 years of practice to sort of, and it's taken me working with, again, people like the people we get to work with in the office, like Bella and the whole group, to actually figure out how to run a sustainable business, just trial and error. And so I was like, I want to understand how other people do it. What secrets are there that may seem very obvious to them that we could bring into our office? So there was also like radio, which is a perfect format for me to selfishly call people for an interview and bring them in. It's great, yeah. What was interesting about it, which was sort of unexpected, was I think because the headphones make the sound really intimate. I talked slower when I was on the radio, and we were able to actually have much more intimate conversations than I expected to. I think because you feel weirdly safe. You're not seeing an audience, and you can hear your own voice, and weirdly it's very comforting. In a way that hearing your voice on the phone is not comforting, but hearing your voice over headphones is very comforting somehow. So we got into very personal discussions, I think, much more than I expected, and people were very open, and that was a huge bonus that wasn't really planned, but was beautiful, I think, with the radio format.
Thanks so much for this.
Yeah, thanks.
I also wanted to thank you and whoever else helped with the BIPOC studio list. It made its way to me in California.
Oh, amazing.
And actually, I think I reached out at the time if I could share it, so I appreciated seeing that. It was like really, really powerful, and I'm curious what the response from others was like in the community, because at least, it made its way to me on the other side of the country, so I'm curious what the ripple effect was that, if any.
The last time I checked, and it's been a little while since I checked, I think we had over 400 offices on there. Mostly in the US, but some international. And it wasn't that often, but every once in a while we would get a DM or something that said, I just got a new job. Like I quit my office, I found a new job at one of the offices on the list. And that was like, it worked. It actually worked. And that alone was amazing. I couldn't tell you what the actual like material effect was. For me anyway, it was just knowing that there were this many offices was really helpful. One of the reasons, we wanted to start it was a friend of mine, Ashley, where's Ashley? Oh, so Ashley, who works at the office, also has her own practice, and one of her business partners at the time in 2020, we were talking about that she was working at an office that I think she was the only non-white person at the office. And I don't remember how, but she was basically saying they don't even want to have a conversation right now in the middle of 2020 about race in any kind. They're like, oh, that's like we don't want to get into that in the office. And she just felt really isolated, had nobody to talk to. At the same time, I think they were putting her up front as the face for her project in Chinatown, which she had nothing to do with. She was just the only Asian person in the office. So it was one of those things where I was like, even in a very intimate young office that should be able to have these kind of conversations, a friend of ours just was really frustrated and sad. And so that was kind of an immediate like, oh, it'd be cool if she wanted to change offices that she could, I guess. I think what she did instead was quit and start her own office, which is even better with Ashley. So.
I had the material effect. I used that list in my role as a teacher, that and office hours to educate myself on where my students might want to work and be interested in.
So this already is like the best feedback. Cool.
I got a spike in inquiries after that list.
Did you? Oh, amazing.
And I was a finalist in an RFP where they found me through that list, so that was.
Oh, wow.
That was cool too.
It's material, yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any final questions? Sorry, I didn't mean to end that talking about myself.
I'm just curious where people are most people from Phoenix? Like, where are you coming from to, like, for us, Arco Santi is in the middle of nowhere, which is why it's amazing. But is it in the middle of nowhere? And where's everybody coming from? Oh, okay.
We came from outside of Arco Santi.
You mean for the lecture?
Yeah.
My family came all the way from Houston.
Please thank your family for us. Cool.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
How has negative feedback helped you, or how has it stopped you, or how has it given you the spirit and motivation to keep going?
I'm trying to think of what negative feedback we have.
If any negative feedback.
I'm sure it's out there.
Has anyone ever told you no? That's
Well, I mean, we get rejected on a lot of projects.
yeah.
How we end up we just, I didn't tell the office yet, but we did not get this one project. But there was a very exciting project that we were very excited about. We did not get it. I think, surprise. I don't know if that pushes us forward, that kind of feedback. I will say, at least for me, how I've learned to respond to it is just like, they're idiots. Like, it's very like me just being an asshole and be like, well, they're clearly like scared and they hired a much more safe office. That's usually what happens. Oftentimes it makes sense. Like, you understand why they would hire the office, and it's like, actually no shade really, but it's the easiest to be like, if they had a little more balls, they would have had a much better design at the end of the day, but they didn't want to hire us. It's basically just protecting our own ego for that kind of thing. I mean, on a personal side, it's not really like negative feedback, but I will say like, it's been very helpful to tap into sort of like negative experiences anyway in the profession to put priority on aspects of the work, whether it's my personal work or through the studio. And I'd like to think anyway, help me also like be more open to other things in the studio that I wouldn't be otherwise. I don't know. I'd probably just ignore negative feedback.